Ready to read you chapter 4 of Island of the Blue Dolphins. If you guys are ready, let's make sure my computer's ready. All right, here we go. I'm reading from a little tiny phone, so I hope I don't make a whole lot of mistakes. Also, I need new glasses, but I haven't been to the eye doctor because of COVID, so if I make a lot of mistakes, be patient with me, okay? All right, chapter 4. The Aleuts left on a sunless day. Out of the north, deep waves rolled down upon the island. They broke against the rocks and roared into the caves, sending up white sprays of water. Before night, a storm would certainly strike. Not long after dawn, the Aleuts took down their skin tents and carried them to the beach. Captain Orlov had not paid my father for the otter he had killed, so when the news came that hunters had packed their tents, all of our tribe left the village and hurried toward Coral Cove. The men with their weapons went first, and the women followed. The men took the trail that led to the beach, but the women hid themselves among the brush on the cliff. Ulape and I went together far out on the ledge where I had hidden before when the hunters first came. The tide was low, and the rocks in the narrow beach were scattered with bundles of otter pelts. Half of the hunters were on the ship. The rest were wading into the water, tossing the pelts into a boat. The Aleuts laughed while they worked, as if they were happy to leave the island. My father was talking to Captain Orlov. I could not hear their words because of the noise the hunters made, but from the way my father shook his head, I knew that he was not pleased. So again, we're getting some foreshadowing from the author. The author really likes to do that to give you the mood and to give you the idea that something dramatic is going to happen coming up soon. And so you can tell I knew that he was not pleased. He is angry, Ulape whispered. Not yet, I said. When he's really angry, he pulls his ear. The men who were working on the canoe had stopped and were watching my father and Captain Orlov. The other men of our tribe stood at the foot of the trail. The boat went off to the ship filled with otter. As it reached the ship, Captain Orlov raised his hand and gave a signal. When the boat came back, it held a black chest, which two of the hunters carried to the beach. Captain Orlov raised the lid and pulled out several necklaces. There was little light in the sky, yet the beads sparkled as he turned them this way and that. Beside me, Ulape drew in her breath in excitement, and I could hear cries of delight from the women hidden in the brush. So one of the things that settlers, white settlers that came to America, liked to trade with the natives was glass beads. Blowing glass and making glass beads was a technology that it was a technology that was used in Europe and also in Africa and also in Asia, but it wasn't really a technology that indigenous people in America had yet. So they like to decorate their baskets with beads, and they also like to decorate their clothes with beads, their shoes with beads, and they also used beads as money to trade. So getting glass beads, it was a simple thing for the white people to bring the glass beads, but it was a really thought of as being super precious to the Native Californians or the Native Americans because they did not have that technology to make glass beads. If you, as we get further along in studying Native Californians, you're going to see that they would make their own beads out of shell, but it would be super involved and super difficult. They would have to drill. They didn't have a drill like an electric drill. They would have to drill by hand little holes in shell. And shell is flaky, so when you drill holes in it, sometimes it snaps and it cracks. So glass beads don't do that. They already have the hole drilled in them. And so they were very prized. That's why all the women that are hiding in the bushes are like, ooh, ah, when they see the glass beads, they're excited because they think that it's a thing of great value, that the beads are of great value. Ulape drew in her breath in excitement, and I could hear cries of delight from the women hidden in the brush. But the cries suddenly ceased as my father shook his head and turned his back on the chest. The Aleuts stood silent. Our men left their places at the foot of the trail and moved forward a few steps and waited, watching my father. One string of beads for one otter pelt is not our bargain, my father said. One string and one iron spearhead, said Captain Orlov, lifting two fingers. Again, tools that were made of, or weapons that were made of iron. Native Californians did not have that technology, and so they would use a lot of obsidian, which is a rock that is, again, very flaky. You can sharpen it, and it becomes very sharp, but it's also very flaky, so you have to make a lot of arrowheads and a lot of spear points because they don't last over repeated use. And so having an iron spear point would be a really good thing for a hunter because iron is going to last over and over again. You can use it again and again, even if the spear hits a rock or hits a bone in an animal, it's going to still be have its shape and still be really strong. Sorry, I keep interrupting. I do that all the time. One string and one iron spearhead, said Captain Orlov, lifting two fingers. The chest does not hold that much, my father answered. There are more chests on the ship, said the Russian. Then bring them to the shore, my father said. You have 105 bales of otter on the ship. There are 15 here in the cove. You will need 3 more chests of this size. Captain Orlov said something to his Aleuts that I could not understand, but its meaning was soon clear. There were many hunters in the cove, and as soon as he spoke, they began to carry the otter pelts to the boat. So do you think that they have more chests full of more beads and spear points? Or do you think Captain Orlov's lying? Dun, dun, dun. Beside me, because now all of the hunters are starting to get in their little boats to go out to the ship, and they're like, he's told them to leave, right? So the people on the island, the tribe on the island is waiting to see if they're going to bring back the other chests that are on the boat. Beside me, Olope was scarcely breathing. Do you think that he will give us the other chests? She whispered. I do not trust him. When he gets the pelts to the ship, he may leave. It is possible. The hunters had to pass my father to reach the boat, and when the first one approached him, he stepped in his path. So her dad is the chief, and you just don't mess with the chief of a tribe, right? It's the leader of their tribe, and so everyone's going to try to protect the leader. So stepping in front of the leader or like getting up in the leader's grill is not a good idea. He stepped in his path. The rest of the pelts must stay here, he said, facing Captain Orlov, until the chests are brought. The Russian drew himself up stiffly and pointed to the clouds that were blowing in toward the island. I load the ship before the storm arrives, he said. Give us the other chests, then I will help you with our canoes, my father replied. Captain Orlov was silent. His gaze moved slowly around the cove. So he's looking around to see where everyone's at, right? Because the tribe has weapons, and he's looking around. That means you know he's lying because he's trying to figure out how to get out of there without getting everybody killed, right? So he's kind of looking around and surveying casually looking around, trying not to draw attention to what he's doing, but he's looking around to see where all the people are with weapons, right? Captain Orlov was silent. His gaze moved slowly around the cove. He looked at our men standing on the ledge of rock a dozen paces away. He looked upward toward the cliff and back at my father, and then he spoke to his Aleuts. I do not know what happened first, whether it was my father who raised his hand against the hunter whose path he barred, whether it was this man who stepped forward with a bale of pelts on his back and shoved my father aside. It all happened so quickly that I could not tell one act from the other. But as I jumped to my feet and Olope screamed and other cries sounded along the cliff, I saw a figure lying on the rocks. It was my father, and blood was on his face. Slowly he got to his feet. With their spears raised, our men rushed down across the ledge. A puff of white smoke came from the deck of the ship. That means they're using the cannon. So cannons could either, if you've seen pirate movies, We learn a lot about ships in fifth grade because they kind of play an important role in California's history. But one of the things that that ships had on them was a cannon, and the cannon could shoot basically three different kinds of ammo. It could shoot a cannonball. A cannonball is really big. It's a big ball of metal, and a cannonball was usually not used against people. It was used against other ships. So if you were in a battle with other ships, your goal would be to knock down the mast, the main mast, which holds the sails up on a ship. So they would shoot a cannonball because the ball is going to hit the mast and knock it over, right? And then if a ship doesn't have a main mast, it can't sail. It just goes in circles, and then finally, glug, 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 glug. If they keep shooting cannonballs at it, they can sink it. So ships had cannons that fired cannonballs. They also fired medium range shot, and then they had these little tiny balls that were called grape shot because they were the size of grapes, and they would use grape shot against people. And so if you can imagine having a piece of hot metal the size of a grape come flying at you at 100 miles an hour out of a cannon, that's going to kill a lot of people. And so grape shot was used in naval battles. It was also used, I suspect that's what they're using right now. They've loaded the cannon with grape shot. A puff of white smoke came from the deck of the ship. A loud noise echoed against the cliff. 5 of our warriors fell and lay quiet. Ulape screamed again and flung a rock into the cove. It fell harmlessly beside Captain Orlov. Rocks showered into the cove from many places along the cliff, striking several of the hunters. So all the women just start picking up rocks. They don't have weapons. Women in many tribes weren't allowed to use weapons, so the women are just picking up rocks and throwing them. If somebody was attacking my dad and he was the chief, I would be throwing some rocks. I'd be running forward and attacking the person, right? So if I didn't have any weapons. So all the women are just picking up rocks and throwing them as hard as they can at all of the Aleuts and at the Russian captain. Rocks showered into the cove from many places along the cliff, striking several of the hunters. Then our warriors rushed in upon them, and it was hard to tell one from the other. Ulape and I stood on the cliff and watched helplessly, afraid to use the rocks we held lest we injure our own men. The Aleuts had dropped the bales of otter. They drew knives from their belts, and as our warriors rushed upon them, the 2 lines surged back and forth along the beach. Men fell to the sand and rose to fight again. Others fell and did not get up. My father was one of these. For a long time it seemed that we would win the battle, but Captain Orlov, who had rowed off to the ship when the battle started, returned with more of his Aleuts. Our warriors were forced backward to the cliffs. There were few of them left, yet they fought at the foot of the trail and would not retreat. The wind began to blow, so they were saved by the weather because ships would have to anchor in deeper water, right? Because ships are large and they have to anchor in deep water. And so usually what they would do is they would anchor the ship far away from like an island, and then they would bring in little rowboats, like little whale boats, smaller boats would carry the sailors in. So the weather's starting to get bad, and that means it's going to be difficult for the ship to launch once they weigh anchor. Once they pull the anchor up, it's going to be difficult for the ship to turn around and get going in the right direction with the sail if it starts storming. So the weather kind of saves them. The Aleuts have to get out of there because otherwise they're not going to be able to make it out in their ship. The wind began to blow. Suddenly Captain Orlov and his Aleuts turned and ran to the boat. Our men did not pursue them. The hunters reached the ship. The red sails went up, and the ship moved slowly between the 2 rocks that guard the cove. Once more before it disappeared, a white puff of smoke rose from the deck. As Ulape and I ran along the cliff, a whirring sound like a great bird in flight passed above our heads. That's probably some of the grape shot. The storm struck us as we ran, driving rain into our faces. Then other women were running beside us, and their cries were louder than the wind. At the bottom of the trail, we came upon our warriors. Many had fought on the beach, few had left it, and of these all were wounded. My father lay on the beach, and the waves were already washing over him. Looking at his body, I knew he should not have told Captain Orlov his secret name. And back in our village, all the weeping women and the sad men agreed that this had so weakened him that he had not lived through the fight with the Aleuts and the dishonest Russian. So now they have no chief, and most of their warriors have been killed, or there are a few that are injured, right? That have injuries. So if none of the women are allowed to hunt, and most of the men get killed in a battle, that means that they're not going to be able to get food, right? Because the men are hunting for their food, or they're not going to be able to get meat. They can maybe get other kinds of food, roots and things that they can eat from out of the ground, or berries from bushes and stuff like that they gather. But so they're going to be in big trouble now as a tribe because they don't have very many hunters left. All right, and on that cheerful note, I will leave you, and we'll go to chapter 5 next time we read. See you later.